year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love. Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work. Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
And Charles Kirsch.
Hi, Richard.
How are you? It's good to see you again.
You too. It's always such a pleasure to co-host with you. I'm glad we've been doing it more and more often.
Oh, once a month at least, we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate and everything. I always begin every show. First of all, this month is ending. Can you believe it?
I know.
This is actually my last show of this month. And all this month, we've been celebrating authors and their books because it's National Book Blitz Month. I want to show you, Charles, just a very quick sampling of some of the authors that we've had on my platform since I started doing this at the beginning of COVID. And then I want to talk a moment with you about some of the authors that you've had the good fortune of interviewing as well.
Yes.
Here they are. And I celebrate you, Charles. I celebrate everything that you have done. First of all, hello to my fellow Aquarian, your mom. How's she doing?
She's doing well. Thank you. Thank you. Right,
Charles' mom and I share birthdays.
Yes. Wonderful.
We got to get together to celebrate. But you, I'm sure, those who see what we do here have no idea of the amount of time and energy and research it goes into putting a show like this together.
Right.
First of all, do you love to read?
I do. I do love to read, and theater books especially. Right.
And we're going to celebrate it. We're going to celebrate a few today. This show came about because I asked you to pick some of your favorite authors and books, and they all said yes to you.
Yes, we have a really amazing lineup today.
So who are some of the authors that you've had on the show that are not here today?
Oh, yes.
You would like to talk about?
There are a few wonderful authors. I don't get the chance to do even as many as I'd like because of all the wonderful theater books that come out every year. But let me see. I hope I won't forget anyone. I had three of the authors who are here today who we'll save for later. But I had Liza Gennaro when she wrote her book, Making Broadway Dance.
You've been on this show, yes.
I had David Loud when he wrote his memoir, Facing the Music. Who else? I had Rob Schneider, who, and I know you did too, who wrote 50 Key Stage Musicals, which actually I wrote a chapter in, and that was sort of my debut as an author, if you will. And who else? I had Harvey Fierstein when he published his memoir, and Bob Mackey when he published the book of his designs. So yes, I've been lucky to have several wonderful authors.
A couple of name dropping there.
Yes, I have to go pick up.
But you are so wonderful at what you do.
Thank you.
Everyone,
You too.
Please check out Backstage Babble. Who is your latest interview, and who's coming up that you're excited about?
Oh yes, I've got several coming up that I'm excited about. A few of them are Kenny Leon, the great director, Michael Cerveris, David Henry Huang I'm talking to in a few weeks. And then I have a special surprise for my 150th episode, which I'm coming up on, which I won't reveal yet, but I'm excited.
Nobody's watching, Charles. It's just you and me.
Right.
So that's really wonderful. Well, we're going to jump right into it because we've got so many incredible people waiting in the wings. When I reached out to you and I said, let's celebrate the Broadway books, you immediately jumped on it and you reached out.
I did, yes.
Was there a specific criteria that you were looking for in terms of who you asked to do the show today? And I asked that question because, as everyone's going to find out, we cover every area of the business in today's show today.
We do, and that's sort of, to be honest, that basically was my criteria to try to have a range of guests. We have some who've written many, many theater books. We have some who this is their first theater book, and it's just a wonderful group here. I think in terms of criteria, just the most recent popular theater books that that came to mind, and we have some wonderful people here.
So I'm going to let you bring on our first guest. Why don't you first of all begin by telling us about the book itself before we mention the author and why this book resonates with you?
Yes. Okay, great. So our first book and author that we're going to bring on, I actually have the book here with me. I wish I had all 6 of the books. Unfortunately, I only have 3 of them here with me, but I'll show them when I have them. This is the book of Broadway musical Debates, Disputes, and Disagreements by Peter Filichia, who's been a friend and mentor of mine for many, many years. It's a wonderful book. It's really perfect for any theater fan, theater obsessive like the two of us, because it goes into many questions about theater and has many opinions, and it's structured almost like the Tony Awards, where Peter will ask a question like, what is the most underappreciated musical, something like that, and then he'll have 4 nominees and a winner and great explanations for all of them. So it's very funny, it's very fun, and we're so glad to have him here.
And here he is. Peter, welcome to the show.
Aren't you nice? Thank you.
So we both have been you have been a mentor to so many people in this business, whether you think of yourself as a mentor or not, because your books are frames of reference for me. I have a shelf full of your books back behind me. And yes, and I do go and check these books out. Peter, where did it begin for you, the love of the theater?
From My Fair Lady. Ironically enough, I didn't even know that they would do live shows anymore. I grew up in a very working class environment. Nobody mentioned the theater. When how I got to My Fair Lady is a long story in itself, which I'll spare you. But when I literally went to the Mark Hellinger Theater in 1961, I thought I was going to see a movie. I had no idea they were doing this anymore. I mean, when electricity came in, they stopped using candles. When cars came in, they stopped using horses. I assume when film came in, they stopped doing plays. It was over. Why would they bother doing the same thing day after day after day? So really, I was amazed. But it was the cast album of My Fair Lady, which I heard after the soundtracks of Gigi and South Pacific, that really cemented my love. And I am definitely a golden age person. So it's very hard for me today to really get enthusiastic about very many shows. And I'm afraid the book really reflects that. It seems to me whenever I'm mentioning a new musical, it seems to be something I'm criticizing rather than something I'm applauding. But anyway, we are who we are.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well,
Go ahead, Charles.
right. Well, I was going to ask you, what were some of the hardest of these questions to answer?
Well, it's always hard when you're dealing with underrated musicals because you're wondering how many people even know what you're talking about. I will admit The Fields of Ambrosia, a musical that I first saw in New Jersey in 1993, really excited me because the premise was so unusual. There are flaws in it. I've discussed this with both writers, and so I'm not telling tales out of school. But nevertheless, was it worthwhile to even mention this musical that has never been produced on Broadway or off Broadway, just in New Jersey here in this country, and for a very short time in England where it bombed so badly, they actually had one of those if you come and you don't like it, we'll give you your money back type ploys, which didn't work either. So anyway, I really worry sometimes about being too arcane, but as the character in Golden Rainbow says, I've got to be me.
That's right. I want to ask, when did the writing begin for you? That you started, and you've written. How many books have you written to date?
Well, I've written 25 books, but only eight of them have been about the theater. I've done a lot of novels for teenagers, some of which have theatrical backgrounds, and even a book on baseball. And baseball was really part of the reason this book came about, because I saw a book called The Boston Book of Sports Arguments in a bookstore where, who was the best left fielder, Carl Yastrzemski or Ted Williams? Who was the better hockey player? Bobby Orr or Derek Sanderson was Bill Russell or Larry Bird in basketball. And I thought this should happen with musicals. So that's why it happened in that way that the book came about. I thought this should happen with musicals because we certainly have a lot of arguments that we have with people. I have a friend who, whenever you disagree with him, he says, "You're crazy." So, I mean, really.
And of course you are. We all are.
Oh, indeed. Yes. Oh, everybody has to go through stages like that. No question. But no, this guy really does feel if you disagree with him, it's a sign of mental illness. So, he's kind of hard to take at times. But anyway, yes, we all have our opinions. And I do expect people to debate, dispute, and disagree. So many people who have read the book said, "Oh, I can't wait to get together with you. I love the book. Oh, it was so great." However, I certainly have a few issues that I want to talk about when we get together. So I have that in store when I have dinner or lunch or coffee with these people.
Well, I want to ask before we bring on our next guest, when you sat down to write this book, I know that you had this idea based on the baseball book, but as you were writing this book, did it turn out the way that you had envisioned it, or did it take on a life of its own as you were writing it?
For better or worse, it was the book that I thought I was writing from day one. And I think all the books I've done have really been that way. I don't think I've been forced to change horses in midstream ever. So for better or worse, I mean, maybe there will be those who will say, "You should have. You should have changed. Are you kidding? Couldn't you see where you were going wrong?" I may very well have gone wrong in any or all of these books, but no.
Peter, my answer to them is write your own book. That's everybody out there, write, because we're the better of it. Charles, stick around, Peter. But
I will.
Charles, bring on our next guest.
Yes, I'm happy to. Okay, so our next guest has a unique experience among the authors we have here today, which is coming more from the fashion world than the theater world in terms of writing. But she has co-written this wonderful glossy coffee table book you see here, Designing Broadway, with the designer Derek McLane, which consists of interviews with many designers, including him, about the different sets they've designed and their processes and their anecdotes, and including several wonderful photos. So here's Isla Mel, the co-author of that book.
And I'm so thrilled. Bear with me 1 second. I'm like the man behind the curtain. Hello, Isla. Welcome to the show, first of all.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm great.
I'm going to begin with the same question. Where did your love of the theater begin? And I know that you come from the world of fashion.
Well, I actually come from the world of theater, believe it or not. Fashion was a detour. I was an actor for 10 years as a kid. And then I sort of segued into fashion for a little bit. And I mean, I'm still there, but Broadway is my first love. Theater is what it's in my soul. It's who I am. So I really feel like I've come home with this book.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, tell us how you chose the sets for this book, the specific shows to focus on and all that.
Well, as an audience member, I feel like I have a unique, and we all do have a unique relationship with the set, because you get to the show and you sort of have like a half hour where you're just sitting there looking at this set and taking in the clues that it gives you about what is going to be unfolded in front of you. And I had seen a bunch of Derek McLane shows. I saw Moulin Rouge, of course, and American Son. And I also saw this little show called Good for Otto, which was off Broadway at the New Group. And it didn't even look like a set. It just looked like some old room that was left over from, the early 70s. And it was just amazing to me that one designer did all of these different things. So I contacted Derek and said, I think this is a great subject for a book. And it was really his great idea to open it up to the whole design community. And so that's where the idea came from.
And what was your process like in collaborating with him? Did you split up the interviews equally, or how did that go?
No, we both wrote, but I did all the interviews, including Derek's. And then he wrote a lot of the stuff that was in between the interviews. So I did some of it, but he did a lot of that. So, but he saw everything that went into the books as I saw everything that he wrote. So we really both have a hand in everything. So it's a very 50-50 partnership.
And did the book turn out the way that you had envisioned the book? Or again, did it take on a life of its own as you began to put it together? I'm sure that the interviews themselves shaped the direction of the book, but did it turn out the way that you had hoped that it would turn out?
It did, actually. We had a very clear idea of what we wanted to accomplish when we started out. When when you start out and you put together a table of contents, you sort of know it's a map of what you're going to do. So the only thing that we didn't know was the content we would get from the interviews. And luckily, we had so much good stuff that our publisher gave us extra pages because the book was supposed to be shorter, but we didn't want to cut anybody. And so fortunately, we didn't have to.
Now that's very unusual. So, yes. So congratulations to you. Any other questions, Charles, before we bring our next guest?
Well, I think we should bring on our next guest so we can have everyone on. Our next guest is another writer whose works have been foundational for so many young people I know, including me and many others. And he just published a new book called Broadway Musicals on CD, A Conversational Guide. So here's Ethan Morden.
Yes, let's bring Ethan on. Ethan, welcome to the show, first of all. How are you?
Thank you. Hi, I'm fine.
Same with Peter. Ethan, I have a shelf just devoted to you alone.
Right, as do I.
So I want to thank you for all the books and the detail that goes. I mean, do you have a social life?
Of course.
Because, I mean, these books are so brilliant. So thank you for that, number one.
You're welcome.
Where did your love of theater begin?
This is simple. As a little kid, my parents had tons of what I call the Decca Classics, Oklahoma Carousel, The King and I. Also, we're moving to other labels, Kismet, Can. And I was just big enough at 3 years old to play them myself. And then the next step came, I have to see these. I knew they were shows. And my parents said, no, you're too young. And I said, I'll break my brother's arm. So they said, okay, you can see King and I was the first show. And that's it. Isn't that simple? They're so marvelous. And you may have seen a movie and you certainly have seen TV, but the curtain goes up and it's actually happening. Very exciting. So that's the answer.
So you had you come from a household where your parents were actually encouraging when it comes
to... yes, they're very cultured and they were big theater goers at the time. Even though it was a long trip, we lived in a small town in Pennsylvania and the roads were all dirt roads kind of thing to New York City, but they still went.
Well, I want to talk specifically about your latest book. And where does this fit in as far as the number of books that you've written?
Well, actually, this refers to what I just talked about, because this goes back to, as you can see by the cover, all those ancient little things. These are all the show albums, and they're the cast albums and the revival casts, and a soundtrack or two, and one English show that I really think is American had to be in there, and no reviews, but I included Ain't Misbehavin' because it's so marvelous. And the fact is, when you're getting started, you don't know where to go because there's so much of it. There's much more than you think. Try writing a book like this and you'll find out how many shows there really are and how many different recordings of them. Pal Joey, Candide, Porgy and Bess. And so someone says, as often happened to me, which one should I buy? And the trouble is the answer is too long because this Candide has this many songs, but this one is better sung. But then don't you want Bernstein conducting himself? And he turns it into masterpiece theater as opposed to, just get out there and do it. So there are all these different ways of thinking, which is the one I want? Or could I buy two? Because in certain cases, the Golden Apple, there's a complete one, but there's also the original cast, which is so lively and true. The revival is a bit of I'm going to sleep. So what do you do? So that's what the book is about. It's 500 pages long, and Amazon gives you the most beautiful white paper with, this is very important to me, big print, because I can't see anymore. So this is very exciting to me, and that's what the book is.
Right. Well, tell us, some of the shows that you cover in this book as CDs are the same ones that you've covered in your Decade series. And so what makes it different writing about them?
The thing is, you can't write a book like this off the top of your head. You got to put all the discs back on. And as you're listening, you think, I never noticed that before. Just for an example, and it's not going to sound that important, but it's part of the book. You're listening to Candide and William Alves, who's he? The tenor. And he comes in singing the governor's song, My Love. And you're thinking, gosh, he's good. He brings together the elitist feeling that I can do anything I want, include kill you, but right now I want to have sex. And it's all in the music, in the way he sings, that kind of thing. So you bring all that, as you're writing the Candide section, you're thinking, why didn't I notice that before? That kind of thing. And I really think the original cast of Candide is the great one. And I saw the show, and I was so keyed up for it. It was the last Saturday afternoon, and it was the first time I was in the front row, and I'd never seen drag queens before, because there are drag queens in it. You wouldn't know that, but in the scene where in Venice, where Max Adrian is going, Lady Frilly, Lady Silly, there were 5 women and 3 of them were men. And I didn't know what a drag queen was because I was like 4 years old. I knew it was something, but I wasn't quite sure what and how it related to me. So all of this stuff comes back to you, and there's always more to write. And the reason why is there is nothing richer than a musical. I guess I should say nothing richer than a good musical.
Very good. That's great. When you sat down to write this particular book, are the first words that we read in the book the first words that you wrote in the book?
Yes, I wrote it in order. I set out an outline. I had all the titles, and I kept thinking, wait a minute, I forgot. Oh, I'll leave it out because there's too much anyway. But the point is, once you get it all set up, you've got an outline and you follow the outline. That's the best way to write. That's why I can write so many books, because I organize them very carefully. I had a friend, in fact, who's getting into writing, and he thinks it's magic. You begin. And the muse is there. No. You have to outline the thing. And if you have a really good outline, the book will write itself. That's how it's done. So I start in the first word and I just go right through to the end.
And you've been writing for quite some time. Do your publishers give you the luxury of the length of the book, or are you within a certain confine as well?
Every author nowadays is confined because there's a certain amount of the expenses, the cost of paper, printing, and so on. You can't just say, I will write a book. Let's find out what it is when I finish it. They won't do that kind of thing. But again, Amazon has the advantage. It's up to you. It's as long or as short as you want. You give them a file and they will publish it, which is one of the many reasons why I love writing for Amazon now.
Good for you. That's great.
But at Oxford, for instance, which is where I've done most of my theater books, once you tell them it's going to be this many pages and this many pictures, you've got to stick to that, because they have figured out how much it's going to cost to produce the book based on what you said. You can't veer off. You can't say it's turned out to be longer or it's turned out to be shorter. They want what you said you would write.
Right.
And the question you haven't asked yet is, what is the most startling thing I've learned in the last few years of researching these books? And the answer is Tennessee Williams likened attending an Ibsen play to eating a box of soap flakes, which I thought was the most marvelous thing I've ever heard, because nobody likes those plays anyway, except for Peer Gynt, which is in a different style. You think of the Wild Duck and Hedda Gabler, excuse me, I'm getting on the first bus to Indianapolis, and no one has ever said that. And Tennessee Williams was big enough to say, I can do Emperor's New Clothes because I have nothing to lose. No one can attack me. I'm canonical now. So that's my favorite. That's the question I want asked, and no one has asked it, so I answered it.
Good for you. It's a great place to be. Charles, do you want to bring on our next guest, or do you have another question for Ethan?
I'll be happy to bring on our next guest, and then I have a question that ties you two together. Our next guest wrote another wonderful coffee table, big glossy book called Moulin Rouge, the Musical, the Story of the Broadway Spectacular. And in addition to that, he's also a very distinguished theater critic, as are a few of us on this panel. Here's David Cody.
David Cody, we're
Hello.
thrilled that you're here today. Hello, welcome.
Great to meet you. Well,
I'm going to do a reading now from my favorite Ibsen play, Lady from the Sea.
Well, so I'd love to ask a question to both you and Ethan, which is about the process of writing a book about a specific show. I know it's something you've done many times before, and Ethan, you wrote the Chicago book, which was so wonderful. And how do you approach a book like that?
Well, I mean, you see it many times. You talk to the book's packagers or producers. You create an outline, like Ethan said. You just don't, you have to have a full structure in mind before you start interviewing people. I mean, these books are very much dependent on the oral history of the making of the show, if that's how you're approaching it. If it's a new show and everyone's around to talk about it, So yeah, I mean, I think I've spent like 20 or so years in the magazine business as an editor and as a writer, which has permanently damaged me in my ability to write long form. So, but I'm able to at least envision these coffee table books in terms of like, okay, here's the first chapter, here are the sidebars, here's the spread on the design of wigs and makeup, that sort of thing. So you're able to sort of break it down into small parts and make it, and know that the art is going to drive the book as much as the narrative is. And so you can't be too precious about this as a book. I very humbly tell my friends, it's not a real book, it's a coffee table book. Some will look at it, some will read, some will look and read if you're lucky. So it's planned down to the last page, what you have on each spread.
But David, I chose a photograph that I want to bring on that I just love this photo. And look at this.
Oh my God. How did that guy get in there?
Great photo.
Yeah, yes. we went at the Rizzoli bookstore on the east side. We had a signing. I got to meet Baz Luhrmann. There's Danny Burstein on the right.
Yes.
And Aaron Tveit on the left. It was great. The fans for the show are extremely, enthusiastic and lovely, warm. And it's
a great production. I saw the show the night before the theaters shut down.
Wow. And then
that posed a big challenge, of course, to writing the book, while also helping it, very much. Yeah.
Charles, this was a two-part question.
Yes, I want to sort of pose it to Ethan too about the process of writing a book.
Actually, I would just go along with what David said. I had it easy on Chicago because it wasn't just one show. It was a silent film, then a talkie, so on, a play, of course, and you have a movie musical as well. So breaking it up into those, I had really kind of like 7 small books to do, whereas David had one big one, on one work, Moulin Rouge. I guess you have the movie as well, but still, you're basically focusing on one large work, whereas I had these little works to do. So that's an easier book to write, to tell the truth. And then the main thing is you just go through the musical Chicago, the Bob Fosse one, step by step by step through the script and the score, just analyzing the whole thing. That's the key thing. That's what people want to know. What is special about the show? And you tell them as best you can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And of course, it's depending on the emphasis that you take, you can focus on obviously on the score, on the book, on the directorial concept and all that. But there also, as everyone knows, it takes a village to make a musical, and there are so many aspects of that you can go into. The design, the wigs and costumes, the technical aspects of the show. I mean, it's sort of endless the amount of material to cover once you get away from the whole strictly the book and the score and things like that.
I want to ask each of you, because you just touched on this for a second, and I'd love to get your feedback from each of you on the impact that COVID has had on each of you as writers. Obviously, you're not able to go out and do the process the way that you did prior to COVID. Are there things that you learned about yourself during COVID as a writer that you think you will carry through from this point forward? I'll start with you, David.
I don't really know. I mean, in a sense, what can I say? It made the job of writing easier. And technology being what it is, you can interview anybody, anywhere. And I missed live theater. What can I say? I didn't have a transformative personal experience. I mean, if anything, I'm appalled and in wonder and horror that there was death on such a huge scale that I didn't personally experience. And the extent to which I was insulated from this mass casualty event is what shocked me more than anything.
Wow. Ethan?
Actually, in my case, it did affect me greatly because I couldn't go to my favorite haunt, the 3rd floor of Lincoln Center Library, and do my research there. That's an incredible resource. And
yes.
You can't, there are certain books that you can't get up there because it was closed for the virus. You can't do the book. So that's why Broadway Musicals on CD was so handy, because I just sat home listening to records.
Isla,
I'm
sorry.
That's okay. So I wrote most of this book during COVID, and I had 70 people to interview. And what COVID did was it created a situation where people were available to speak and were happy to have something to do. So that was a plus, you know, if there was anything good about that whole situation.
Right. And I know Richard and I have benefited from that as well.
Yes. Peter?
Well, for one thing, I did a lot of walking and lost 40 pounds, so that
Good
was
for
a very
you.
good thing. So I concentrated on that. No, I wrote a number of plays, some of which have gotten done here, there, and not everywhere. But I decided to do that, and so one was just done up in Sullivan County, New York. Supposedly, there'll be a production in Manassas, Virginia in August. You've heard of April in Paris? This is Manassas in August. And that's where I'll be. And another production of another one is scheduled for Boca Raton in November. So I turned to playwriting, and then we'll see how that plays out.
Great.
Yeah. Well, David, before we bring our next guest on, I would love to ask you, with between Moulin Rouge, Wicked, Jersey Boys, and Spring Awakening, were all of them or any of them your idea, or were they pitched to you? How did that go?
They're all pitched to me. It's sort of, a show has to have a certain momentum going for the for producers or bookmakers, publishers to invest in such a costly endeavor. So yeah, it was. I mean, I was very lucky that Alex Timbers, the director of Moulin Rouge, put me up for the job. I had been covering his work, you know, off Broadway for years, and so I have him to thank for the job. And Carmen Pavlovich, who was a tremendously, you know, I didn't know if this book would survive the pandemic, frankly, you know, but it did. It was wonderful.
Right.
Well, congratulations to all of you. Charles?
Yes. Well, so I'd love to bring on our penultimate guest for today, who is another extremely prolific theater author, as well as publication editor and all of that, which is Robert Villegas, who has really a book that came out very recently and an upcoming book. His upcoming book is Right This Way, History of the Audience. And his most recent book is Good Morning Olive, about theater ghosts and all of those stories. Both are wonderful. I've had a chance to read both, and what can I say? They're perfect for theater fans. So Robert, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. It is really an honor to be in this company. I mean, look at these people. These are amazing people. So thank you for including me in all of this.
So Robert, I'm waiting for your book to arrive. I cannot wait, because you went from a completely different.
This is the one that's coming. The Ghost Book, Good Morning Olive, named for Olive Thomas, who haunts the New Amsterdam Theater.
But we're going to talk a little bit about Right This Way. I love the fact that you wrote for the point of view of the audience. That's never been done before.
Well, I've always loved being part of an audience. You know, people always say, well, why aren't you? Have you ever wanted to be an actor? I did do some acting in high school, H. Frank Carey High School. And they said, or a playwright or something like that. You know something? I love being part of an audience. The audience experience is so exciting to me. I feel so involved, and I feel like I have to tell you, kind of my central theory of this book is that theater does not happen on the stage. What happens on the stage is designed to evoke theater. Theater happens in the hearts of the audience. What happens on stage is designed to create theater inside of you. And I've done this history going all the way back to the Greeks, going right up to Zoom in the present. And I cover not just the theater, I cover all audiences, all types of audiences, because they have a lot in common and they have a lot of differences. Just being in that audience experience. And it's interesting, you know, we train people to be actors. We train people to be writers. We don't train people to be audiences. We expect you to be an amateur when you walk into the theater, except if
perhaps they should in some cases.
They should have audience studies. And I have a curriculum that I could sell. Anybody's interested, audience studies curriculum, how to be an audience.
I want to join you on that.
Please do.
We'll bring Charles along too, and anyone else who's interested. I'd love that. What was the impetus for this book, however?
A number of different things. And I have to say, having sat and I've certainly, some of the other people on this panel have me way beat on this. I stopped counting my Broadway shows after 2,000 Broadway shows. So I've sat in a lot of different audiences, but every year, and this is coming up, is going to be my 44th time, I go up to Boston and I watch the Boston marathon of science fiction movies, because I also love science fiction.
Yes.
And the audience is so lively. The audience, when the villain comes out, the audience, they hiss the audience. As a matter of fact, we are invited to bring along our ray guns to shoot the bad guys when they come on the screen. It is just a wonderful audience experience. And I started to think to myself, I should really write about what it's like to be in an audience and hissing the villain like they did in the old days and cheering. And whenever there's a countdown, which I have to tell you, in science fiction movies, there's a lot of countdowns. The whole audience counts down along with it. And one of the things that interests me is different audiences have different expectations. If you don't cheer at this marathon, they're like, what's the matter with you? Don't you like the movies? Whereas if you're at a symphony or you're at a Broadway show and you start talking, and if you were to start shooting the bad guys at a Broadway show, they'd say, what's the matter? Don't you like the show? So it's and like sports audiences, they expect you to yell and cheer and curse at the pitcher and things like that. Can you imagine if they did that at a Broadway show? I mean,
well, in some shows they do.
You. Of course, now she's not and doesn't do stage anymore. So now I guess these people are safe.
Well, Charles, do you have a question? Because I've got a question waiting as well.
I do, yes. Well, so tell us, what are some of the oddest audience reactions you've seen in a Broadway theater?
Oh, well, I saw a production of Shogun where the set collapsed on the main actor, and people were just sitting there and watching this thing collapse on the actor. And after it fell on him, we were looking at each other and they're like, was that part of the show? Are we supposed to be alarmed by this? Are we not supposed to be alarmed by this? I went to see a production of Peter Pan at the Gershwin Theater. It was a revival of Peter Pan. And during intermission, one of the little girls had eaten way too much chocolate. And and during the second act, she got an upset stomach and she was trying to get out of her seat. Didn't quite make it. Threw up down the back of my shirt. And I have to say that I've never had that experience before. And I hope I never have it again.
Well, I got one that's worse.
This is a live audience. If I were sitting in my living room, I wouldn't have had this highly fragrant experience in the theater. But also, when an audience loves something, you're in an audience and they love it,
Right.
and there's a cheer. It's almost like a physical sensation of the cheering and the clapping. I saw up at Encores, they did Little Shop of Horrors. And when the cast came out and when they sang Suddenly Seymour, the reaction at the end of Suddenly Seymour, I felt like the theater was going to explode. When I saw Dreamgirls, and if you remember at the end of the first act, she sings, and I'm telling you, I'm not going. I had gotten a cheap seat, and so I was literally sitting in the last row of the top balcony at the Imperial Theater. And when she finished singing that song, I thought that the ceiling of the theater was going to burst out into the sky over 45th Street. When you're part of an experience like that, it's hard to tell people about an experience like that. But being in an audience and sitting all the way in the back and still having that experience was just amazing to me.
Well, I'll share a story.
I felt like I needed to write about it.
And I want to bring on our next guest who's been waiting so patiently in the wings. But Sally Struthers said that when she was doing Grease, the revival, a man sitting in the front row leaned over into the orchestra pit and threw up. So they had to keep going. So
it happens. I know we want to get to the last guest. I don't want to shortchange the last guest, but in part of my research, I went to the National Archives and I got accounts of people who were in the theater the night Lincoln was assassinated. And they talked about seeing his weary face and hearing his laughter and the audience feeling so excited to hear the president, see the president live in person, and hearing his laughter after the Civil War had only ended 4 days earlier. And he decided to go. By the way, our American cousin is Ted Lasso. It's the same story. Seriously. But going and then watching him be assassinated and hearing the gunshot. And one of the people, one of my accounts is a guy who was sitting right under the box where Lincoln was shot. And Booth jumped to the stage and said "Sic semper tyrannis" and ran off. And this guy jumped up out of his seat and tried to chase down a Booth. And he says, I wasn't able to. Mr. Booth knew his way through around the theater in a way I did not, but I managed to get the scoundrel's hat.
Wow.
This was this audience guy. He managed to get Booth's hat, and he felt like he had, done a little something to get back for the horror of seeing Lincoln assassinated. So the book is filled with stories like this. So I'm going to let you get to the next guy because I don't want him to be shortchanged. Go.
No, everyone's gonna get equal time here, and
Okay.
and then we're gonna have a roundtable discussion about creativity. So Charles, tell them about our next guest.
Yes, our next and final guest is Kasim Gaines, who is the author of this wonderful new book, When Broadway Was Black, that I have here, which is a revised and updated version of his book, Footnotes. I recommend buying both, not just one, why not both? They're both so wonderful and such a great account of U.B. Blake and Shuffle Along and all of that. So thank you for joining us today.
Kasim, thank you for your patience.
No problem. No problem. I've been enjoying listening to all the conversation. It's great.
So, Kasim, you take us back to Shuffle Along and the impact that had on Broadway at the time of its opening. If you can take us back there and give us a Reader's Digest version of that time and what brought you into writing this story.
Sure. So I think what was really interesting, I missed out on the COVID question, but it's funny because I actually was writing the majority of the book during the lockdown as well. And the parallels between when I was writing in 2020 and what I was writing about in terms of was just sort of, I feel like I have to get me. But was sort of fascinating because Shuffle Along was produced in the aftermath of the Spanish flu pandemic that shuttered theaters. New York's economy was decimated. It was the Prohibition era, and I don't think a lot of people realize that it didn't just create a lot of speakeasies and the rise of the flapper, but also so much of New York's economy came from the legal sale of alcohol. And now that was off the table, New York's economy was just in shambles. It was also the greatest period of racialized violence in this country since the Civil War. The Tulsa Race Massacre was just 1 week after Shuffle Along opened on Broadway. And yet in this landscape, this musical produced on less than a shoestring, they were $21,000 shy of even having a shoestring on opening night. And yet it became the biggest sensation of 1921. And not just that, but it led to this period of renaissance, not only of Black musicals on Broadway, but Langston Hughes in his memoir credits Shuffle Along with kickstarting the Harlem Renaissance, with bringing Black people in particular to New York and creating an art scene where white theater goers would then go slumming it uptown and continue the party. So it was kind of fascinating to write this book during that period. And it just felt like while theater people know about Shuffle Along, or most theater people know about Shuffle Along, it's not a show that we think about in the same regard as a Showboat or Porgy and Bess or even Carmen, like as something that like really is a moment for racial representation. And when I say we think about it, I mean the mainstream population.
Why do you think that is? Do you have a theory on that?
I think there are lots of reasons. I think there are lots of reasons for that. I think part of it is that Shuffle Along was so revolutionary that it didn't take very long for it to be co-opted. I mean, I'm not going to say Gershwin, lifted from U.B. Blake's score per se, but I will say that there are people who say that. I will say that there are people.
That's a good way of getting around.
Well done.
Even if you look at something like the Charleston, which obviously was a dance craze that took over the nation, that comes from Runnin' Wild, which is a follow-up in a lot of ways to Shuffle Along. So I think, it's like in any medium, right? Like the person who does it first is recognized in real time, but then it doesn't take very long for people to forget who was the first one to do it. I think that's part of it. And I think the other thing with Shuffle Along that's really interesting is, you know, there were a couple of revivals. There was a revival in 1932, Shuffle Along of 1933, but it was in 1932. They were very optimistic. It didn't make it to 33. And there was a revival in 52 that lasted only 4 performances total. And what you start to see by the 52 production is the Black community actually saying, you know, this show has some racial stereotypes that we find to be problematic. This isn't a show that we should sort of remember. Thankfully, theater has moved on, and representation in theater has moved on since Shuffle Along in 21. And there's almost a little bit of a concerted effort to put the show in the vault, and it stayed there. I think you could argue until George C. Wolfe sort of opened that vault back up in 2016.
Right.
What was the seed initially that brought you into wanting to tell this story?
So by complete accident or just chance, I should say, I had I procured a ticket to the 98th performance of George C. Wolfe's Shuffle Along at 98 of 100. So it was the day before it closed, and then there were 2 more performances the next day. And I was in the audience, I'm talking about audience experiences. I was in the audience for a talk back after the show, and it was Brian Stokes Mitchell actually who said, you know, he was so happy to be doing this show, but could not believe that a show that was trying to remind people of this watershed moment that shouldn't have been forgotten was now closing without a cast album, without a recording besides what's available at Lincoln Center, without a published libretto. That basically, you know, after 10 Tony Award nominations and 100 performances, the 2016 Shuffle Along, a lot of people don't even remember that it existed. It had kind of the misfortune of being in what I think is a great year for Broadway, but it also was the Hamilton year, of course. So sitting in the audience and listening to this and just realizing, as a writer, there are things that all of us can do in 500 something pages or however many pages that you can't necessarily do in a dramatized, you know, somewhat, you know, creative licenses are taken with a 2.5-hour musical that George C. Wolfe did. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but it's a different medium. But as a writer and journalist, I felt like I had a responsibility to sort of help preserve this history in any way I could.
Well, thank you. Thank you for putting it out there.
And you speak in your epilogue, you tell this story about how Shuffle Along was deemed unproducible by Jack Viertel at Encores in the 2000s. And what do you think it is about the show that would make it not go over well today, for those who don't know it?
Charles, I love that question because that's one of my...
Oh,
did he freeze?
I think so, unfortunately. Yeah. I guess this is bound to happen sometimes.
What might help is for you to leave and come back in. If you, sometimes that helps, because I definitely want to hear the answer to this question.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And so while we're waiting, I would love to extend the same question I asked to Robert to everyone else on our panel about unusual audience experiences they've seen happen. I know, Peter, you've seen many, many productions over the years, and you must have some stories.
One of the things that really fascinated me was the original production of Working, because there's a song that a school teacher sings. And I saw the show on successive performances. And the first time I saw the show, the audience sat there dolefully listening to this woman tell of her problems and feeling so bad for her about how difficult it is to be a teacher, especially when you're getting older and they're expecting a lot of changes. The next night I went, because I really thought the show was worth seeing more than once, the audience thought it was the hilarious song. They thought it was so funny. What an idiot she is, so on and so forth. So it really is something to think that people can have such a different reaction. What I loved about the 2001 revival of the Rocky Horror Show is that they honored their audience. They, I worried what was going to happen. Were people going to go throw rice? Were going to start cigarette lighters? They actually had a section of the theater that represented the audience, and they had people actually playing audience members as well as mannequins sitting there too. But they really let it be known that we wouldn't be anything if it weren't for you. And as worried as I was that the audience was going to go out of control, they asked for it because they started off by saying, "Give me an R, give me an O, O." All right, you're entering audience participation into evidence right then and there. So I thought that was really, really something. And the audience basically behaved. I think because they were given permission. If they were told, "You can't do this, you can't do that," I think there would have been some mavericks. But those two things come to mind immediately. There are others, but I'll let others talk.
Right. And does anyone else have any stories like that?
Well, I will say this. Over the years, I've heard a lot of actors say they hate Friday night shows, that the audience is completely different on Friday night. They worked a whole week. They're tired. A lot of times they'll come in intoxicated, and they feel that the audience is a lot of times it's they've been brought there on a business deal, and they're not a lively audience. Whereas, and of course, matinees, that tends to be kind of older audiences. So actors that I've spoken to over the years have said that they really feel, as Peter said, that not only will the performers give a different show on different nights, but the audience responds in a different way on different nights.
Robert, I have a question for you. Those of us, I mean, all of us here who love going to the theater, I also love the experience of being with an audience that is there as a collective with what's going on in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, as we all know, there are people that are on their phones, they're doing other things, they're having conversations. Lots of things are going on in that audience. Based on all of your research, when do you think the biggest shift began to happen in terms of audience etiquette in the Broadway theater?
Well, a lot of people, they're used to watching now television, and they're used to responding in a different way. I find that people laugh more at the theater when they're part of an audience. It's funny, my wife and I, when we sit and watch television, I laugh a lot. When there's a funny joke, I laugh, and she just looks at me. It's not that she doesn't have a sense of humor. When we're at the theater, she laughs a lot more. When you're part of a group, it's I have a quote in the book. Someone famous once said that audiences, that individuals in the audience don't know what they're talking about. They're idiots. But as a group, they're the smartest people in the world, and they will always tell you about the show something much better than an individual will tell you about the show. Sitting back there, listening to the audience reaction, which is why they had previews in the old days. They wanted to hear it and tryouts out of town. They wanted to hear how an audience reacted. But if you talk to an individual person, they'll always give you bad advice. They'll always give you a useless piece of response. But as a collective, and that's part of what it's like being in an audience. You are responding not just as yourself, you're responding as a collective.
Right.
It's also interesting to, I mean, I've been on both sides of the, love it or not so sure I love it reaction to really pre-enthusiastic crowds at certain shows. Like I remember Be More Chill and Six, when I went to review them, I knew a little bit about them. I mean, you want to go in fairly fresh, and the crowds at those shows were acting like it was already a cultural phenomenon. Because of the virality of the support of the music already. And so, as a critic, not to be too curmudgeonly, but as a critic, you're like, what the hell? It's like let the show open and be reviewed. But then again, at Moulin Rouge, you have the excitement of recognition in the audience because these songs are so well known to people, so it's designed to deliver that dopamine to the audience. So, there's nothing good or bad about it per se, but it is interesting to see audiences so prepared to love a thing.
Well, look at K-pop. I don't know if anybody. I'm sure Peter saw K-pop. I'm sure.
Yeah, I saw it.
It was interesting to see that, like, maybe a third of the audience was having the time of their lives. They were clapping and screaming and dancing in their seats. And another third of the audience was kind of confused. And another third of the audience, they were hostile. They were like, what is this crap? And I can't understand a word they're saying. Why don't they speak English? And so it was just fascinating to sit there and be part of that audience. I remember seeing Sondheim's Passion, and I was sitting next to a couple, and they hated the show. They hated it. They were like, "Oh, this is awful. This is terrible." I was having a wonderful time, and so I actually turned to them and say, "If you really don't like the show, either be quiet or leave." And they left. God bless them. They left. It's so interesting the way different people will respond in a group situation like that. And I never get tired of it. I sometimes when I'm watching a show, I'll turn around just to see everybody's faces, because when you're facing the stage, you can only see the actors. I like to turn around and
the husband's
and
asleep.
see what people are looking like if I know a really good joke is coming, I'll turn around just to see how people are going to respond to it. That's what, by the way, that's what John Wilkes Booth did. He knew the play so well that he knew that there was a line that would get a huge laugh, and that's when he was going to shoot Lincoln, because he wanted it to kind of cover up the sound of the gunshot. And so he sat there and waited until the funny line was spoken. You know, it's audiences are just they're amazing creatures. They're amazing beings. It's an amazing state of the Greeks believed that going to the theater was important, not only for your mental health, but for your social health. They believed in something called catharsis, spelled with a K, that you needed to go and you needed to get the negative emotions out. And that's why you went to see a tragedy, and it made you healthier. It made you
with other people.
It made you a better person to sit there and to cry your eyes out, or to be torn apart by the horror of somebody destroying themselves.
Whereas you go to a comedy to become a worse person, I think.
That's a shame. I have a question that I want to ask again, each of you, and we may go over just a few moments. But I want to ask each of you. You're all avid theater goers. We all have that enthusiasm of going to the theater. Charles, I'll start with you on this question. You, I guess, I can easily say, the youngest person on this panel. A particular performance that really was like a shot of adrenaline through your entire system, a performance that will stay with you your entire life.
That is a great question. Let me think about that. Well, I would say, starting with sort of the most recent one, because that's what comes to mind first, I would have to say it was probably John David Washington in this most recent revival of The Piano Lesson, which I read in books and accounts and things like that, of having this experience of seeing a performer sort of come onto the stage like a hurricane and just light up everything. And I felt like I hadn't known quite what that sensation sort of felt like until seeing that performance, because it was really, right from the start, it was just like a ball of energy that lit up the whole play and never diminished as it went on. So I thought that was an amazing performance, and one that I hope is recognized by awards and everything, even though it's closing earlier in the season.
Yes. Everyone hold that thought in the back of your heads. Cassine, welcome back.
Welcome back.
I was pulled through the vortex, but I didn't miss a beat in the conversation because I was able to watch the stream. So I'm all caught up with where everyone is.
Good. So, Charles, you were asking a question before everything shut down. So you can go back to Cassine.
About why you felt, and Jack Viertel felt, and everyone, that Shuffle Along was unproducible.
Sure. So thanks, and sorry to backtrack everyone in the conversation, but this was sort of a fascinating point in the book and in my research, because there was Jack Viertel was considering doing Shuffle Along for encores, and he was very excited about doing this, but also had some trepidation. The idea was that he wanted, of course, to honor the show and the legacy of the Black performers that staged it. But the show does traffic in some dialectical humor, some antebellum humor. The original production, there were a couple of characters, not most even, but there were a couple of characters who were Black actors in blackface. And so he was concerned that
there is something out there that does not want this story to be told.
Yes.
I want it to be told.
Robert, next book about the ghost of the theater. I think we've got a few right here.
Right.
So I hope that Cassie will make it back. So I want to hear this.
Yes.
But while we're waiting for him to come back, Peter, same question that I asked Charles. A performance that just was like a shot of adrenaline through your body.
Well, I view William Daniels' performance in 1776 the best I've ever seen an actor given a musical. And while in second place, Zero Mostel, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum within the first 3 months of his doing it when he wasn't fooling around yet. What really answers this question is Robert Lindsay in Me and My Girl, because I am telling you, he is a person who is from a lower class. The character Bill Snibson is from a lower class background, and he has inherited this money, and he comes into a castle where all these highfalutin royal regal people are, and he came in hat in hand, so meek, so mild, and we have all been in that position where we've entered a room and we feel inferior to somebody. All of us have had that, and this is what he expressed, and we felt so bad for this guy who did not know how to behave in this group. He just wasn't sure if when he put his thumb up as if to say everything's all right, oh, is that low class? Oh, I wonder. Every other production I have seen in Me and My Girl, and by the way, this includes the people who succeeded Robert Lindsay on Broadway, came in, ha ha, how you doing? That type of feeling. And you actually wanted them taken down a peg. So the difference between Robert Lindsay's shy performance that we could all identify with was something that really made the show very special to me. And every time I see Me and My Girl, I hope somebody is going to do it that way. And nobody in the 9 productions I've seen, or the 9 performances I've seen since, has ever done that. And the show really misses a lot by doing that approach.
What a great point. David?
So this is a great performances.
Yes, a performance that really was like a shot of adrenaline through your.
Oh God, I'm just gonna pick Christy Neversall in Grey Gardens. That musical just was very dear to me. It's one of those shows that has a couple numbers in it that always make you cry. Around the World, Another Winter in a Summer Town. It's a great score, great show. I've always loved it. I mean, it's one of my favorite musicals for the past 20 years. And Christy Neversall, who is producing such a pure sound anymore? I mean, it's just, what a voice! What a voice!
Her latest CD, by the way, After the Fall, get it. Every one of you get the CD. I just uploaded it, downloaded it, whatever it is, and it's just exquisite. Ethan.
I'm going to take something way off base. Ethel Merman in Happy Hunting. I was very young, and it was the first time I noticed some incredibly powerful personality just coming right over the footlights. She didn't just, everyone knows she was this great singer, but it was more than that. The energy level was incredibly high. She would drive her shows. But this one more, I've seen her in other shows later, but this one, she really kind of pushed it along. I think she felt, as actually the unnamed producer of it, that it needed pushing because it has the strangest book on earth. Although it has a great set of Ethel Merman numbers, the other numbers are completely, snoozeworthy. But the strength of personality, and granted, this is not like Alfred Drake and Keene, a great acting role, and great singing acting role. This is musical comedy at its, I won't say best, I don't know what to call it, but it was so powerful and intense that it left a mark on me. And even though this was like 8,000 years ago, I still remember the show very, very well. I could perform most of it for you if you want the chorus and so on.
Well, we're ready.
That kind of thing. But the point is, even the thrill was you'd always have the album and then you'd see the show. And sometimes a song would turn up that was not on the album. In this case, it was a Ziegfeldian showgirl number called For Love or Money. It was all the chorus girls in bathing suits on shipboard. And I sat there thinking, this is the worst song I've ever heard. But it's interesting to see them kind of moving around and being beautiful and cute. And this is the kind of music we don't have anymore. But there are all these odd little, the flotsam and jetsam of musical comedies in those days. And then binding it all together is this incredible personality. When she was singing that song, Mr. Livingston, it started in a book scene, and then she came forward, the Traveler curtain closed behind her, and she kept on singing the song. And nowadays people would say, where is she? Where is this taking place? In those days, people didn't care. It was Ethel Merman singing this great song. So that's my answer. That was the first time I noticed the power of personality. These eccentric, these people that you couldn't have gone to high school with. They were from a different planet. And that's what made musical comedy, not musical plays. You wouldn't want someone like that in Carousel or Oklahoma kind of thing. This was for the feel-good crazy show. And they were feel-good and crazy. And that was the first time I noticed it. So that's my answer from the Blue Sky.
Wow.
I've got to jump in here. I'll do it very quickly. But in 1991, I was in Sydney, Australia, and I went to see Anything Goes. And I am telling you, when the woman came on stage as Reno Sweeney, she just came on stage, and I said, "Oh my God, this is a star!" And it turned out to be one. Geraldine Turner, a big deal there.
Oh yes, she is great.
And I am telling you, all she had to do was enter, and I knew she was sensational.
That's great. I feel that every time you walk into a room, Peter. So just to let you know, I'm just putting it out there. Isla?
Sure. This is easy for me. It was Len Cariou in a show called The Speed of Darkness. And I don't know if anyone even remembers that show, but his performance was just incredible. The journey he took you on from the beginning to the end was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I, at that point, only really knew him as Sweeney Todd. And this was so different. Every time I see a show, I hope to see a performance that exciting.
That's incredible.
Wow.
That's great. Robert?
I would have to say one of the first shows that I saw, my parents took me to see The Fantastics. And there's a scene in The Fantastics where the old actor who portrays himself as somebody who knows Shakespeare inside and out. So El Gallo says, well, do a speech from Shakespeare. And the old actor is stopped. He doesn't know what to do. So he puts together bits and pieces of different scenes from Shakespeare. And at one point he says, screw your courage to the sticking place. And I was 12, and it got a huge laugh from the audience. Why? Because it sounds dirty. And I was like, I didn't know what he was talking about. So afterward, on the way home, I said to my parents, what did he mean when he said, screw your courage to the sticking place? Why did that get such a big laugh? And my parents, who obviously thought it was also a dirty line, said, we'll tell you when you're older. And I thought to myself, theater is full of secrets, really good secrets that I need to find out. I need to learn all these secrets. And I have to tell you that really has motivated, that show has motivated my interest in theater, to find out all the secrets that are in all the shows. As a matter of fact, I went back and I wrote a book about the Fantastics, and I became friends with Tom Jones, who wrote that line. And I have to tell you, was pretty pleased by the fact that this complete misunderstanding of his comedy scene would have motivated somebody's career.
Well, congratulations, and thank you, Tom Jones. Charles, do you have any questions before we begin to wrap everything up?
I don't, but I would like to promote some of the things that everyone here is doing coming up.
I hope so, absolutely. And just to let everybody know, if you send me links, I will put all those links on my YouTube channel.
That's true. I know Ethan has a book coming out in June called Gays on Broadway that sounds wonderful for Pride Month, I'm assuming. And Peter has a book of quiz questions that I know from hearing them on his podcast, Broadway Radio, are fascinating and very challenging. I know is co-running this campaign with Carol Burnett to get the Majestic Theater renamed after Hal Prince.
Oh, great idea.
I personally think is a wonderful idea too. I know David writes reviews for Time Out that you can find all the time.
No, not anymore.
Oh, not anymore.
No, not for 5 years. But I'm at The Observer and at a place called Four Columns as well. Yeah.
Right, and Robert has his 2 books that we mentioned. So, and then if anyone has anything else they'd like to talk about.
And Charles Kirsch
came out last fall. This is coming out this summer.
So Charles Kirsch, Backstage Babble. Everybody. Charles, we'll do this again sometime next month.
Yes.
Thank you all for the gifts that you've given to all of us and will continue to give. I mean, the great thing about a book is these books will be there. I read something very interesting the other day, that as a writer, when you're writing in the moment, but you hope that 40 years from now, that people will be able to go back to these books and refer to these books as textbooks and learn about a world that I came to New York long before you were born, Charles. 1979, first Broadway show I saw was Oklahoma at the Palace Theater with Christine Ebersol, and fell in love with her at that moment and have been a fan ever since. I've seen everything she's done on the Broadway stage since then. How lucky we are that we have these books and that we have each other. My request for all of you is to keep writing, keep our shelves full, keep sharing these stories with us. I'm going to give my closing remarks, and then I'm going to give each of you a chance to give your closing remarks. It could be about anything that we spoke about today that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave with everyone. I do want to say, I hope that all of you will come back at any time. You always have a platform here to promote. I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Treat them to the theater. Treat them to one of these books. All of these books are available on your favorite platforms. If they're not, call those platforms, write to those platforms, and request that these books be available there. It's very important. I have a friend, and he says, we're all in this together. We're all in the same storm, but we're in different sized boats. Some are in canoes, some are in yachts, some are in sailboats, some are like Fanny Bryce pushing a tugboat upstream. It doesn't really matter what size boat you're on. Just make sure that whatever boat you're on, you have a skipper by your side. I'm going to leave the screen. I'm going to turn it over to you, Peter. When you finish speaking, you'll pick the next person. And I'd like Charles to have the final word today. So everyone, Peter Filichia, thank you.
Well, Robert mentioning the Fantastics came to mind. One of the last times I went to the Sullivan Street Playhouse, of course, there'd been a lot of talk about all the difficulties with the word rape in the show and how it would affect people and all that went with that. So it became abduction and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, here's my point. So there's a little girl in the audience, and I'm thinking, I wonder if her parents know about this controversy with rape and all that. But in the middle of the second act, there's a reference to pirate's booty. And the little girl turned to her parents and said, "That's dirty." Because the word booty today has a completely different meaning to kids than pirate's booty. Robert?
I just wanted to say that how much the audience has changed even in the years I've been going to see shows. There are shows that they were able to do then that they could not in a million years do now. Look, 100 years back, if you were in vaudeville and you did a dirty joke, you could be blackballed. That would be the end of your career. But all the vaudeville acts were people doing ethnic humor. They would do accents. Look at Chico Marx doing his Italian character. Very popular was hair lip. Performing, you talk like this, and people thought that was hilarious, and it's horrifying today. It's amazing how much the audience has changed in 100 years, because now on sitcoms, little kids tell dirty jokes and everybody laughs. But if you tell an ethnic joke or wear blackface, which at one time was the most popular form of entertainment in the country through minstrel shows, nowadays, that will be the end of your career. So audiences, to me, are just so interesting. I wish that the other gentleman who was here eventually is able to do a show with you. You should really have him on, because his book is just fascinating, and a lot of it does have to do with the audience. So I would love to have given some of my time to him and let him wave his hands instead of me.
And who would you like to?
I would like to. Isla, I'd like to hear about your the book that you worked on.
Well, I feel like my book is sort of a cousin to David's book, because we have a big Moulin Rouge section, and of course Derek McLean designed Moulin Rouge. But I'm excited to be working on a new book that I'll give you a little exclusive on. I'm working with the American Theater Wing to do a celebration of 75 years of Tony Awards.
Oh, how wonderful.
So that's very exciting. And then I just wanted to let people know that I do a podcast called Jiffy Pop Culture. And we primarily discuss movies, but it's actually a secret Broadway podcast. We have an episode on Texas Chainsaw Massacre where we spend like 20 minutes discussing Agnes of God. So it's very eclectic.
And then who would you like to?
Well, Ethan.
Okay, I'm going to just, since we're talking about books, the last theater book that I really enjoyed was Shy, the memoirs of Mary Rogers. I thought this was such a wonderful way to do it. A lot of people don't like it, of course, but I'm not talking about that. They got Jesse Green to kind of superintend. And if you knew Mary, the book really captures that sort of ambivalence she had about everything that was fronted by a sort of playful, mean girl, sophisticate sort of front. And it really captures what she was like. I think if you liked Mary, you would like the book. And if you didn't like Mary, you wouldn't like the book. But I thought it was a wonderful way to, all the footnotes that people have complained about so much. In other words, you have to explain all this stuff for people that don't know it. But rather than slow the text up and say, oh, by the way, that was, and then he wrote, and then, oh, that's the one who, it's all at the bottom of the page. So if you don't like footnotes, don't read the footnotes. I don't know why people are complaining about it. No one is holding a gun to your head. But we were talking about books, and this was the last time I read a theater book that I found really beguiling and amusing. And I know that from now on, the great stars, when they do their memoirs, are going to tell their publisher, I want that guy from the Times. Yeah, forget it. Everyone does this kind of thing once and never again. And Jesse has already paid his dues, so he's moving on to other things. That's my last word.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. Yes. And David.
Geez. Well, I mean, I just want to let you know, here's the book. Moulin
Yes.
Rouge. And, you know, on the top we have truth, beauty, freedom, love, the bohemian rallying cry, their motto. And, you know, what can I say? I mean, that's those are big ideals to aspire to, but I think everybody should look into their lives and see, you know, how much truth, beauty, freedom, and love they have and how much they can increase it and give it to others. You know, I mean, I certainly want that in my life as much as possible. And I feel very lucky and to have been on this panel with these wonderfully talented people and to be able to write about theater, which is the great love of my life, you know.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful message to have. And so I'd love to sort of finally close out first by saying thank you to Richard for being such a great co-host and for giving me this opportunity to do this with you and on your show. And finally to our wonderful panel of authors who agreed to join us today. And then lastly, to encourage everyone watching to go out and buy these specific books, but also to buy every new theater book that comes out because they all have something new and valuable to contribute. So thank you and have a great day, everyone.